Hi, in this video you're going to get to know one of the most famous figures of British literature. I said British because he was not English, as many others, as Oscar Wilde, as T.S. Eliot, as many others writers and poets of the so-called English literature, but he was not actually English. James Joyce was Irish. He was born in Dublin, but he felt he was more European than Irish. And as a matter of fact, he spent the majority of his life far away from Ireland. He lived in Paris, he lived in Zurich, where he died. He also spent many years in Italy. He lived in Trieste. And he worked there as an English teacher, and his children got Italian names. Even though Dublin was far away from him, geographically speaking, Dublin was present throughout his life in his works. His main works are all set in Dublin, or at least in Ireland. And this is the reason why, for example, in his letters to his family back in Ireland, he asked for many specific details about the names of the roads or the color of a certain building, because he needed some details to represent Dublin as he remembered. His descriptions, anyway, are not only based on physical details. Actually, physical details are few. This is because James Joyce was almost blind. He had a very poor eyesight. If you look on the internet for pictures of Joyce, you will find that he was always wearing very thick glasses. This is an important element to understand his works, because in his descriptions the senses are always present, mainly the sense of hearing, the sound of music or the sound of anything else, and the sense of smell. Odors, smell are quite common in his works. Let's try to focus on the main features, the modernist features of his works. First of all, his conception of time is the same as the one followed by the poet T.S. Eliot. Time is subjective. There's not an objective dimension of time. Time, both in Eliot and in Joyce, is not measured in minutes and hours, so scientifically, but it becomes subjective. For example, one of his main works is considered to be Ulysses. Ulysses is the story of this man, Leopold Bloom, and we get to know everything about his life, but the story actually takes place in just one day. And it's a very long story. It's, if I remember rightly, 500, 600 pages, but just one day of his life. Another thing he shares, another element he shares with the poet T.S. Eliot is the belief in the impersonality of the artist. According to him, the artist's task is to render life in an impersonal way, to describe experiences and emotions in a detached way. The feature which is absolutely dominant in his works is the technique of the interior monologue, which is absolutely a modernist technique related to a psychological phenomenon, which is the stream of consciousness. What is it? The stream of consciousness, il flusso di coscienza, is a phenomenon that everyone experiences every day. The fact that when we think, there's no, in many cases, there's no chronological order. Maybe you are thinking about a specific element, and a minute later you're thinking about something else. If you try to put down that stream, that flow of thoughts you have in your mind, if you try to put that down into words, that becomes an interior monologue. So the stream of consciousness is the phenomenon which occurs in your mind, the fact that you think, and it's a continuous flowing of thoughts. The interior monologue is the technique used by Joyce, for example, but also by Virginia Woolf, to transform that stream into a narration. There are different levels of interior monologues. In Dubliners, for example, the interior monologue is used in a very simple way. There's simply a shift from the narration to the thoughts of the protagonist. In some other works, this technique is brought to an extreme, where any logical organization or punctuation is completely lost. And that's the example of Finnegan's Wake. Starting from these two works, we can say that if you consider the entire literary production of James Joyce, you can actually divide it into different levels, as if it were a sort of game. Level 0, so Joyce for beginners, Easy Joyce, is the collection of short stories Dubliners. Dubliners is narrated in a traditional way. There are simply some shifts to the interior monologue. So at certain points, we actually enter the character's mind and we understand what's going on under the surface. And that's easy to read. And that's why Dubliners is usually studied at schools. Then you have difficult Joyce, level 3, 4. That could be Ulysses. Ulysses is a classic. You will find Ulysses in many of the lists about the best books of the entire history of literature. But as Mark Twain said, a classic is a book that everyone praises but nobody reads. Why? I've tried to read Ulysses. I've tried many times, actually. But you get lost after some pages. Maybe you read a chapter if you are brave enough. But it's quite difficult to follow. In many passages, there's no punctuation. So an entire page could be given without a full stop. So after a while, your mind gets tired of trying to figuring out what's going on. And Extreme Joyce, so level 100, is Finnegan's Wake. To be honest, I've tried to read it as well, but I think I stopped after 20 lines. It's really complex. Finnegan's Wake is a book about everything, every place, everywhere, every thought around the world. It's a dream without a sense, without a logic. It's a wake, è una veglia. So it has a sort of dreamy condition. So that's absolutely impossible to read. I suggest you just to taste these 3 different levels. Just read maybe 10 lines from each to get an idea about the differences they have. Finally, you can't deal with James Joyce without focusing on 2 important concepts that are present in his works: epiphany and paralysis. Let's start from paralysis. Paralysis is the most important metaphor used in his works, mainly in Dubliners. It's both a mental paralysis and a physical one. Dubliners, Irish people, are being suffocated, are paralyzed by the institutions, mainly religion, family, and politics. So as a person who was educated as a Jesuit school, he knew how difficult it was for Dubliners to try to get out of their comfort zone. They had religious references, they had their family, and everything was paralyzed there. Any type of thought which was different from the common thoughts was considered to be weird and strange. And we will see that in a short story from Dubliners, which is entitled The Dead. Maybe in another video because it's a long story. Paralysis is also the result of external forces from which the individual cannot rebel. Probably because this person doesn't have the courage to do it, this person is afraid of doing it, or simply because there's a sort of unawareness. This person doesn't even know about his condition, doesn't even realize that he's paralyzed in a condition that will never change. And then epiphany. You know what's the epiphany? The epiphany is the revelation of the Magi, according to the Catholic tradition, to the Christian tradition. And Joyce used the epiphany again as a moment of revelation. The epiphany is the moment in the story where the character suddenly, all of a sudden, realizes an important truth about his or her life. And usually this epiphany derives from something external. It could be maybe just listening to a song which reminds you of some specific episodes, or just a very simple gesture by somebody else. That's the moment in which the character realizes something important about his or her life. Now, there's a lot to be said about his works, so I will post another video about Joyce's main works. Okay? Thank you for watching.